Okay, everybody, welcome to Social Cognition and Attitudes Part 2. So this is where we ended last time. We were talking about persistence of schemas and the perseverance effect, including the backfire effect and confirmation bias. Now I want to ask you a few questions. So which of these is the most common cause of death in the United States? By most common, I mean among this list, which of this is the more common cause of death in the United States? All right, keep thinking about that. Keep thinking about that. Here's another question. This question is going to be about Brian. So I want to introduce you to Brian. That's Brian right there. Brian's very easygoing. You know, he attends a state college in New York. He's tan. He likes the beach. Where's Brian from? All right, great. Another question. So the first thing I need you to do right now is to tell me whether the last digit of your phone number is odd or even. I'm going to put you into two different groups. So tell me whether the last digit in your phone number is odd or even, and 0 is even. All right. You told me that your phone number ends with an odd number. So what I want you to do is, and tell me, how many computers have you owned in your lifetime? Okay, you told me that the last digit of your phone number is even. So I need you to tell me, how many pencils have you owned in your lifetime? Just estimate. All right, now I want you to tell me, how many countries are there in the European Union? Great. So why on earth did I do all those things? Why did you have to tell me all those things? The answer is heuristics. We've been talking about social cognition. Remember, cognition is how we process information. Well, a heuristic is a mental shortcut that we use to make judgments quickly and efficiently. So a heuristic is a mental shortcut for making a decision. Now, by a decision, we only just need to come to a conclusion. Normally, you're thinking about decisions, you're like, oh, who should I marry? Or what school should I go to for my, and where should I live? That's not what I'm talking about. A heuristic, a decision doesn't have to be that life impactful. It can just be an answer to a question. So, for example, when you answered, when you told me how many countries were in the European Union, you were making a decision, right? A decision of what the right answer is supposed to be. That is decision making at its most basic level. Heuristics are shortcuts we use to make decisions because there's a lot of decisions that you don't want to think about very much, like how many countries are in the European Union. You don't want to think about it too long. And so what we do is we take steps to automatically or quickly come to a conclusion, not necessarily like getting all the pieces of information. We're not doing extensive research here. We're just coming to a conclusion relatively quickly. That's what a heuristic is. So the availability heuristic is when you make a decision based off of how available something is in your brain, right? How accessible that concept is in your mind. So when you answer a question, and the answer to your question is just whatever kind of comes up first when you think about it, you're using the availability heuristic. So for example, so the way you can think about it is a mental rule whereby people, they base their judgment on the ease with which they can bring something to mind. Great. So it's how quickly it comes to mind. That's what you base your decision on. So the example that we often use is the one that I gave you about what is the more common cause of death in the United States. And on that list was suicide, Alzheimer's, diabetes, and stroke. Well, Alzheimer's, diabetes, and stroke are much more common causes of death. They're much more common than suicide. But still, people often choose suicide as the more common cause of death. Now, why is that? Well, the reason why is because you are more likely to hear about a suicide than you are to hear about somebody who's just had a stroke, for example. Because it's just more shocking, it's more impactful, dramatic at least, right? To when somebody unfortunately dies by suicide. So that is more likely to be on your mind, to be accessible in your brain. And so you're more likely to choose that as the correct answer, even though it is factually incorrect. The ways that these have been asked in different studies include things like, which is more common, death by car accident or death by stroke? And people are more likely to choose death by car accident. The typical incorrect answer is car accident. The more correct answer is stroke. In fact, strokes are 4 times more likely to result in death than a car accident. Another way to ask it, which is more common, death by heart attack or by murder? And many people will actually say murder, right? But in reality, heart attacks are 30 times more likely. Death by heart attack is 30 times more likely than death by murder, right? Just like we talked about with the other ones. Now, this research was also done in conjunction with other things, right? So it doesn't have to be death that we're talking about. It can be anything that requires you to have something come to mind, right? So just think about yourself like just taking a trivia, doing a trivia game. Often you'll answer with whatever comes to your head first. But that's not necessarily correct. So let me give you another example. What's more common, word that starts with the letter K or words that have K as the third letter? Well, in reality, the typical answer is, well, words that start with K. Why is that the typical answer? Because it's a whole lot easier to come up with a word that starts with the letter K than it is to come up with a word that has K as the third letter. In reality, there are many more words that have K as the third letter instead of the first letter. But we tend to say words that start with the letter K because it's easier to come to mind. It's easier for us to think about, to have it available in our brain. That is the availability heuristic. All right, let's talk about the representativeness heuristic. You remember when I was talking about Brian? I know that's a different picture of Brian, but he works either way, right? So he attends a state university in New York. He's got a deep tan, and he likes to go to the beach, and he's mellow, right? He's really easygoing. Okay, so where is he from? Well, many of you, I'm sure, said that he's from California. Let's talk about the representativeness heuristic. So, by the way, Kahneman and Tversky and Kahneman and Tversky, they are very famous psychologists from Israel that they actually got the Nobel Prize in economics because of their work in heuristics. There is no Nobel Prize in psychology, so they got the Nobel Prize in economics for this stuff on decision making and heuristics. So, availability heuristic we already talked to. Representativeness heuristic is when we make a decision not based off, we make it based off of a stereotype that we have. So, for example, you might say California because someone who is tan and likes the beach and very mellow, oh, that fits my stereotype of California, and therefore I'm going to choose it. The representative information is the stereotypical stuff, okay? The representativeness heuristic is when you make your decision based off of representative information. That means stereotypical information, okay? In your brain, deep tan, mellow, likes the beach, those things are representative of the group California. But you might be right generally, except the real problem with this particular example is that you make this decision, you decide he's from California, even though you have other information that's more helpful in answering the question. If you chose New York, you probably did that because I told you that he attends a state university in New York. Well, it turns out that 90% of the people who attend a state university in New York are from New York. And so if you should guess anything, where is this person from, you have actual information, base rate information, which says, hey, among this population, 90% of the people are from New York. Now, let me tell you about Brian. He is in this group, and he's mellow, and he likes the beach, and he is tan. Mellow, likes the beach, and tan is not percentile information. It's just a stereotype that you have. In reality, the base rate information is the information that you should be using to make that decision, right? So it's information about the frequency of members of different categories in the population. In this case, we know that 90% of the people who go to a state university in New York are from New York. And so you should be making that decision based off of that piece of information, not based off of just kind of fuzzy stereotypical information that comes to your mind. Anchoring and adjustment. So you remember, I didn't. You didn't see the whole thing when I asked you what the last digit of your phone number is. If your last digit was odd, then I asked you how many computers you've owned in your lifetime. If the last digit of your phone number was even, I asked you how many pencils you've owned in your lifetime. Anchoring and adjustment is a heuristic about numbers. So here's the way you think about it. You are given a number. You have a number in your brain. It can be a high number, it can be a low number. So let's say that, and this is what they did, Tversky and Kahneman in 1974, they actually had people spin a wheel. So the number was totally random, right? It was totally random. So let's say that you spun the wheel and you got 250, right? Or somebody else spun the wheel and got 100. And then I asked both groups, tell me how many countries are in the United Nations. The real answer, by the way, of countries in the United Nations is 193. Countries in the European Union, I'm pretty sure it's 28. So I think it's 193 for the United Nations. I think it's 28 for the European Union. You can let me know if I'm wrong later on. But the point is that you anchor to the random number that you came up with first. So when people spun the wheel, if they got 250, what they would do is they would say, all right, 250 is in my brain. But you asked me how many nations are in the United Nations. Ooh, 250, that sounds a little high. But it becomes an anchor. So what you do is you anchor on that number, 250, and then you adjust, but you don't adjust enough. You never adjust sufficiently to get to the right answer. So if somebody rolled or spun a 250, they might say, well, you know, I think that the number of countries in the United Nations is, and they would anchor down, right? Or number of countries, this is supposed to say, by the way, I think I meant to say European Union on this one, by the way. But what they do is they anchor down. So if it was 250, you asked me the number of United Nations, maybe I would say, oh, I think it's maybe, 220. Versus, number of nations in the United Nations, gosh, I'm thinking about 100. 100 sounds low. I think it's going to be 150. So what happens is, let's say that I answer 230 for if I'm thinking about 250. The 250 becomes an anchor, and then I adjust down from it, but it still is tied to that 250. Cognitively, it's tied. I don't adjust enough. So what that means is that when I asked you how many countries were in the European Union, if you were thinking about how many computers you've owned, you're probably like, oh, I've owned, I don't know how many computers you've owned. Let's say it's 4. How many countries in the European Union? I'm thinking about the number 4. Well, 4, that's really low. It's probably more than that. I'm going to guess 15. Versus somebody who is thinking about the number of pencils they've owned. Gosh, pencils I've owned. I've probably owned, 5,000 pencils. Okay, so I'm thinking about 5,000. How many countries are in the European Union? Boy, not 5,000. I better adjust down. It's probably something closer to 50. So what you're doing is based off of an arbitrary number that you're thinking about at the beginning, it becomes an anchor for your subsequent decision that you have to make. All right. So anchoring and adjustment is a mental shortcut whereby people use a number or a value as a starting point and then adjust insufficiently from that anchor. All right. So a number like 250 as a starting point, and then you don't adjust enough down to answer the question. Great. Those were all heuristics. Now we're going to talk about something totally different. So what I want you to do is not think about a white rabbit. So look at this picture and don't think about a white rabbit. Just don't do it. Stop thinking about a white rabbit. Just stop. Are you thinking about a white rabbit? Of course you're thinking about a white rabbit. Of course you are. But I just told you not to. Well, now we're moving away from this automatic idea of cognition. All right, so this idea of heuristics, which are relatively automatic. And now let's get into ideas of controlled thinking. Things that actually take mental effort to control what you are thinking or not thinking about. So what I just barely did has to do was I'm telling you not to think about the white rabbit. The controlled thinking that we're talking about now is something that is conscious, intentional, voluntary, effortful. Whereas the stuff we were talking about before, like heuristics, those are automatic. They happen quickly. You don't sit there and analyze it. You just automatically do it. So controlled thinking is complex. You normally do it, when we have an unusual situation, something you don't have pre-existing knowledge about. So if you don't have a stereotype set up, a schema set up about the situation, about the people, about what's going on, and generally for things that are more important, right? So you might pretty quickly just use a heuristic to make a decision about a trivia question, but what you're going to do for your career, you're probably going to put some actual controlled thinking in because it's important and you don't have pre-existing knowledge for it. All right, the white rabbit, though. The white rabbit is an example of thought suppression and the ironic process. So what I was trying to do, when I said don't think about the white rabbit, is I was trying to create thought suppression in you. Well, here's the problem with that. When you are actively trying to control your thinking to not think about something, you're more likely to think about it. That's the ironic process. It's ironic because you're trying not to think about it, and that it's ironic because you're thinking about it more. Does it make sense? By trying to not think about it, you're thinking about it more. Now, why might that be? Well, because what you're trying to do is you're trying to actively use your cognitive resources to not do something. It's hard for you to do. That's hard for your mind to do. If you have something that you want to distract yourself from, you shouldn't just sit there and say, oh, don't slouch, 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 don't slouch. Because what you're doing is you're thinking about slouching. You're more likely to slouch when you do that. Instead, you should think about a positive action instead. Something like sit up straight, sit up straight, sit up straight. If you're sitting up straight, you're more likely to do it. Instead of not slouching, you want to sit up straight. So what you want to do is try and think about it in a positive term. It should help you out. All right, I want you to answer this question. Let's say that you're taking this class. Let's say that 87% is the cutoff for a B+. And this is the final grade, right? There's no more grades after this. Would you rather see that your grade was an 87%, an 88%, or 89.49%? So which one of these would you most like to have as your final percentage score, and all of them are a B+? Well, what we're talking about here has to do with counterfactual thinking. Many people actually would least like to have an 89.49%. Why? Well, it's pretty obvious. It's because it's so close to an A-. You're so close. Even though 89.49 is actually more, right? It's a better score than 88 or 87. You're so close to that A- that it hurts you. And it creates what calls counterfactual thinking. Counterfactual is the idea of, oh, if I'd only done this. It's taking something that's happened and think about the facts in a different way. I'm going to change the facts. What if the facts were different in my past? That is counterfactual thinking. What if I had only done that? Oh, if I had only said this. Oh, if only just one time I had done that one. Oh, if only I had just, called that one time. If I'd only just studied a little bit more. That's all counterfactual thinking. So it's mentally changing some aspect of the past as a way of imagining what might have been. You do this all the time. I know you do this all the time. It's not helping you very much. So, Medvik and Savitsky, they found that students were more satisfied when receiving a lower numerical grade that's far from the cutoff than a higher numerical grade that's close, very close to the letter grade cutoff, right? Like the A- that we just talked about, right? The B+ versus the B+, that one. Why? Because they don't want to go through the mental anguish of having to sit there and think, oh, if only I just handed in that one. Oh, if only I had just guessed that one. Oh, if that one exam score was just a little bit different. That is counterfactual thinking. And oftentimes it's a negative process. It's not good for us to just sit there and rehash our entire lives. Counterfactual thinking, though, is very common, and people do it all the time. Now, there is some reasons why that might help in the future, saying, oh, if I'd have done that differently, I would have been better, and in the future, I will do this. But the true definition of counterfactual thinking is just looking at the past and trying to think of what if it had been different. All right, I want you to tell me, are you satisfied with your life? In general, right now, are you just generally satisfied with your life? So, this is a social psychology class, and so we actually need to think about beyond your personality, beyond your actual disposition, are there any situational factors that might influence a question as important as how satisfied are you with your life? Well, the answer to this is yeah, we know there are. And I'm gonna come back to this one. I'll tell you about this in a second. So, affect and cognition. Well, actually, I'm gonna go back. I apologize. I'm gonna talk about attitude. So, an attitude is an evaluation of an object. So, an object is any noun, any person, place, or thing. So, even your life, that is an object. So, if you're saying, "Hey, I love my life," you are expressing an attitude. If you say, "I hate my life," then you are expressing an attitude. Attitudes can be positive or negative. They can be strong or they can be weak. But when we're talking about attitudes, we're not talking about this idea of, oh, I have a positive attitude. Ooh, my attitude is I'm an optimistic. No, that's not how that goes. An attitude is an evaluation of a specific object. So when I say I love my wife, that is my evaluation of the object, my wife, right? I love her. It's a strong, positive evaluation. I hate mayonnaise. That is a strong negative evaluation of mayonnaise. I don't like, what do I not like? I actually don't like raspberries. I know, some people, I just don't. I don't like raspberries, and I don't hate them, but I just don't like them, right? So, I kind of don't like raspberries. That is a weak negative attitude, right? A weak negative evaluation of the object, raspberries. Okay, so when we talk about an attitude, we're talking about your evaluation of an object. Now, you can even evaluate your life as the object. So let's go back to Schwartz and Clore. All right, so affect and cognition. Affect has to do with your feelings. Your feelings. Your cognitions, that's your mental state. These are connected with each other. We'll get more to that when we talk about emotions in a later chapter. But affect and cognition. So let's talk about Schwartz and Clore. Schwartz and Clore in 1983, this is when people still use telephones, right? So what they did is they did a telephone survey, and they just called people up, and they said, "Hey, how is your life how is your life satisfaction today?" The difference is that half of the time they called when it was raining outside, and the other half of the time they called when it was sunny outside. And what they found, these green bars represent more life satisfaction. When it was sunny outside, people said that they had greater life satisfaction, right? That their life was going better in general. When it was raining outside, people said their life was going worse. The situation, in this case, it was the actual meteorological situation, was affecting something as important as how do you feel about your life? Rate your life. How's it going? What's interesting, though, is they did a second part. So let me say this first. The impact of our feelings on our judgments depends on the perceived informational value of the feelings. So your feelings are going to change your attitudes if it feels like it's pertinent. So here's what they're saying. They're saying that when it was rainy outside, people kind of felt a little right? And that feeling of meh was something that they felt like was pertinent to evaluating their life. How's your life? Meh right now. And they had less satisfaction. Whereas when it was sunny, that was not, it was sunny outside, so people felt fine. Now, here's the interesting part about this. Schwartz and Clore did the same experiment on rainy and sunny days, but this time, half the time they asked, how is the weather where you're at? And then they asked, rate your general life satisfaction. So follow me on this. The only difference is that one question, how is the weather outside? So they would call them up, Hi, this is Joe from the research lab. How's the weather outside? Okay. Tell me, how would you rate your life satisfaction? All right. When they asked, how's the weather outside? People would look outside and say, oh, it's raining, or oh, it's sunny. And then when you ask them how their life satisfaction is, there was no difference between the rainy and the sunny people, right? The people who are in the rain versus the people who are in the sun. When you ask them, how's the weather outside first, it didn't matter. If you did not ask them, how's the weather outside, then the rainy people had a worse life than the sunny people. How is that? Well, here's what's going on. When you bring attention to the cause of that meh feeling, people understand that they feel a little meh because it is raining outside. And they say, oh, just because it's raining outside, that doesn't need to affect my life satisfaction. When you paid attention to the rain, then they were able to say, you know what, I acknowledge that it's raining outside. That is not pertinent information. That feeling of meh, that affect that I'm feeling, the meh affect, is not pertinent information to answer how is your life doing generally. We pick up affective and other cues in our environment, in our social situation, and we use those to make decisions, to make evaluations, to make attitudes about things that are sometimes very important to us. So, for example, have you ever gotten in a fight with someone? You're like, oh man, I'm really angry at that person right now. And the reason why you're angry was actually because you were hungry or because you were tired. What you're doing is you're letting your affect from one source, being hungry or tired, affect your evaluation, your cognition of somebody else unwittingly. All right, let me give you another example. When you graduate from college, will you be happier than you are now? So a lot of people, when you answer this, say, yeah, I'm going to be happier. Well, we need to talk about something called affective forecasting. Remember, affect is your feeling states. Forecasting means predicting your feeling states. And what you'll find is that we as humans are really bad at this. We're just not very good at affective forecasting. Often when we think about big life events, graduating, getting married, having a child, etc., we're like, oh, when that happens, I will be so happy. Conversely, we think about negative events. Oh, when my parent dies, when my significant other dumps me, those kind of things. When those things happen, I'm going to feel awful. And to be fair, those things do have an impact on your life, right? They do. I'm not saying that those important events don't have an impact on your life. That is not what I'm saying. What I am saying is that the impact they will have on your feelings will probably be relatively temporary. We actually exist at a homeostasis. We have an affective, well, they call it like a hedonic treadmill, but the affective state, how you feel right now, I'm assuming you're not going through anything majorly dramatic right now. And if you are, then this doesn't apply to you. But if you feel pretty normal right now, this is probably how you're going to feel after you graduate. Now you're going to feel good for a few days after you graduate, but this feeling right now, if this is a normal feeling for you, is probably where you're going to be after you graduate. Now, I want to make sure I'm very clear about this. I am not talking about somebody who's dealing with a mental health issue like depression, right? So if you're experiencing major depression or some other symptom, when this is not a normal kind of a situation, right? If you have an unhealthy mental state right now, I am not talking about this to you. I am not saying that you're going to feel this way forever. In fact, we know that treatment of depression can be very, very effective. So if that is what's going on, I want to make sure I'm clear that that you shouldn't, I'm not telling you you're going to feel this way forever. However, if you are in a normal state, right? If you're feeling, hey, this is pretty normal for me, then this is probably about how you're going to feel after whatever life event you're going to have, after you get married, after you graduate, after whatever the life event happens to be. Now, you'll feel good for, maybe a few days, maybe a couple weeks, but not months, not months. You're going to feel about this way. Okay, let's go ahead and end right there.